Okay, wonderful. All right, so today at OUX Happy Hour, we have got Lauren Stone. So Lauren and I go way, way back. Lauren was one of the first people to play test Crosslink, the OUX game that is relaunching later this year. Is that how we met, Lauren, or was it Ladies at UX?
We actually met, and I did your workshop back in 2013.
No, it was 2015.
No, this was before it was even like a proper workshop. It was not configured.
You remember better? Yeah, it was a mess.
Still at the circuit.
Yeah, you were at Creative Circus. Okay.
Yeah, because I was still at the circuus. So yeah.
I was probably calling it modular design or something. Mm-hmm. Right. So way, way back. So we met a long time ago. I don't even remember. So Lauren is also from Atlanta, and we've gotten to hang out a lot through Ladies at UX in Atlanta, also through playtesting Crosslinked, and then through the certification. So Lauren got certified in cohort 2. Was a superstar of cohort 2, and is using OUX in her work and bringing it to, I think, several companies now. She is currently senior product designer at Florence Healthcare, which is doing really amazing, innovative stuff in the healthcare space, and yeah, has been using OUX wherever she can fit it in. She's going to talk to you today about how to fit it in within constraints like legacy software, constraints like maybe you don't have a whole lot of time to fit it in. So I'm really excited to hear how Lauren is using OUX in the real world and making it happen, and sometimes kind of backing in to OUX, which will be very exciting to see how she does that. So without further ado, Lauren, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Okay. So thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. Like we just mentioned, I first met Sophia years ago when I was at the Creative Circus, and it was so early in my journey that I didn't even realize the power behind what she was teaching. It took me a few years, and once we got into early 2020, I'd been working as a product designer for a little while and decided to make lemonade out of lemons during the pandemic and expand my skills by completing the cohort 2 OUX strategist certification. Since I completed that course so early on, I've been able to introduce and apply OUX methodologies into 2 separate organizations. Something that was very obvious to me while taking the course is that Sophia's process is a really powerful tool to create comprehensive digital solutions. But as a product designer working in legacy systems and agile methodologies, this quote really stuck with me. Of course, it's easier said than done, but some OUX is better than no OUX. But you probably wonder, like, where do you start if you already have the system? That's why we're here today. So quick rabbit hole before we get into that, just in case you're new here, a quick high-level background on what is an object. Sophia has plenty of materials available for more comprehensive explanation, but for this purpose, OUXers design systems based on things that we call objects, not actions. Think of it as designing for nouns, not verbs. These objects are things that have high value to the business and hopefully to the users. Because we know people understand things through the context of other things, the blue squares on the screen are a few objects you'll find on imdb.com. A user would go to IMDb looking for a particular movie, a TV show, celebrity, award, and as designers, we want to organize that information in a way that is easily understandable and even more easy to find. That's the power of OUX. But that brings us back to the question, how do you do that on a legacy system? I've had a lot of success in working sprint by sprint, connecting systems piece by piece. The fundamental understanding of the structure and the connections that OUX teaches allows you to identify and understand the power of the noun and how to view the actions or verbs as something that aligns to the objects. In legacy systems with limited time and resource, it's not really possible to make this happen in a comprehensive way from the back end to the front end. Instead, just fake it till you make it, which honestly works pretty well. As I mentioned, this comprehensive approach of building intuitive systems, a good way to start with this is actually just reverse engineering the problems that OOUX solves. So even if it's only a facade, it's a really good one. And it could give you a really successful approach to designing systems. So in order to reverse engineer those problems, you can start by looking at what we call unintuitive objects. The unintuitive objects are objects that are inconsistent, unrecognizable, disconnected, or lack capabilities. And we'll go through each of these one by one. We're going to start with the shapeshifter object, which is probably the most recognizable of the unintuitive objects. Inconsistencies in systems cause a lot of unnecessary confusion. So for the first example, I'm going to share a project that I worked on a little over a year ago before joining Florence. But don't worry about trying to break down what's kind of the details of the screen just yet. We'll get into more details in a minute. But this example is focused on filter tags for a community learning product that I was tasked with white labeling and enhancing. These are 2 pages from the same application. The page on the left is the community discussion page, and the right is the professional development lessons for community members. As we zoom in, notice the transformation roadmap pathways. Teachers love these long titles in the pink box at the top of the page. These are actually filter tags that function exactly the same as the popular tags in the section below. But visually, they're represented completely different. The popular tags are also listed under the discussions to represent the applied filter. This page is a zoomed in version of the professional development lessons page. Notice the roadmaps in the upper right-hand corner box are the exact same filter tags as the transformation roadmap pathways filters we just saw on the previous page, but now they have a different label and a different representation. Also notice the popular tags at the bottom of the page is the same popular tags from the previous page, but now for some reason it's a different color. I immediately recognize this inconsistency as a shapeshifter object. So in the redesign, I created consistency across the pages and enhanced the design within a reasonable amount of scope for this phase. I worked with the stakeholders to rename the filters and then added an additional filter category by stakeholder request. So the filters are now consistent in labeling, layout, and colors from page to page. And I also added a selected state so the users can easily understand which tags are applied, and also that these are filters. The selected state colors do take color contrast into consideration for the different categories, but future enhancements could even make this more ADA friendly. This page is the professional learning page. Again, I think it's much easier to understand the associated filter tags. It also looks like the same product again. It really unifies those pages. In this phase, there was a limited amount of available content, so there's a lot of overlap between learning roles. So those tags were intentionally not included in the card layouts, but are available as filters. I also assigned icons to align with the learning tracks, which was previously known as roadmaps, to make these tags more identifiable and to reinforce that consistency. My advice for combating shapeshifters: put a little detective work in. You know, when you're working in a legacy product, always do the digging to understand how that feature you're working on is connected everywhere in the system, not just within the scope that you've been tasked with. You may not be able to resolve all the inconsistencies in that project in that release, but to understand where the gaps are, you can then start working with product to roadmap and start to resolve that inconsistency. Also, that detective work can help your UI patterns, and that comprehensive understanding helps you reinforce really good patterns and also eliminate bad ones. So our next object is isolated object, and that happens when something is not connected to something that it's related to. This is commonly intentionally used as a dark pattern. How many times have you tried to cancel service, but that cancel button has been buried somewhere in the system? That is an isolated object, but intentional. I think this one might be one of the more frustrating offenders. This example I'm going to use today is from personal, it's not my work, but it's from personal experience of trying to reset a package to somebody I recently shipped to on my UPS account. When I logged into the account, I didn't have the shipping address on hand, but since I sent to the person, just a few weeks ago, I looked at my profile and I could not find my shipping history. Nothing in my information addresses. I looked over shipping, but I looked at the first couple options in shipping, and the content all seemed to be service-based and nothing that was connected to me as a user. So even though the word shipping is in the title, this thing is not like the others in the shipping section. And as a user and a UXer, I would think my shipping history would be listed with the rest of my profile information because it's content that's specific to me, but it's not. So instead, it's listed with the shipping information. So shipping history is an isolated object because it's not connected to the rest of the user-specific information. I was curious if this happened elsewhere. And as you can see, shipping and support are both objects that are connected. They're related. So you can see in the menu, those the relationships between the two because they both appear in each section. And when you click on both of them, they both lead to this related page. This is how a connected object should work. My advice for combating isolated objects is even if you're not doing a full object map, understand what your objects are and how they relate to each other. I often do a relationship map just for this, even if you do nothing else. Understanding those relationships and ensuring they're connected eliminates isolated objects and really helps users navigate the system. This brings us to the third unintuitive object, which is a broken object. This one is, I feel, just soul crushing because what needs to happen. It is just not going to happen. I'm going to continue with the UPS example because that isolated object led me right to this broken object. Okay, so we're clicked into the shipping history list, but notice that we shipped to Jenny Marquez. But as I mentioned, I want to ship to her again. We know that shipping history is disconnected, but I want to save Jenny's ship to address in my address book located in my user navigation, kind of to avoid the whole thing I just went through. So if you look in the action menu under the ship to information, there's no way to do that. This action is not available anywhere. A user is not able to save to the address book. They can only enter the address into the address book, but saving an address you've already actually used that's in the system before is not available. So you will notice on the action menu, it does say you can ship to again, but that's not an ideal or good solution because it only saves your shipping history for 30 days. The result is users have to manually enter the address into the address book in order to save them, even if they previously used that and it already exists in the system. My advice for combating broken objects is to really think about your calls to actions. When you're working on UI, keep in mind the most common actions. If you're not familiar with CRUD, it stands for create, read, update, and delete. These actions happen on most things unless there's a good reason not to. Some other common actions, just to kind of keep a list of: share, find, filter, add, archive. If you need to keep a running list, do that. And this way you can kind of run through and start to think about what's missing. This way you can, it just helps to resolve that. I find a list always helps you think about the things you're missing. So you may also notice on the screen that my name appears in both my address section and my context list. But there's no clear difference as to what these two things do. When I added my name to one, all of a sudden it populated in the other. So this could be an example of our next unintuitive object. Fast objects that aren't recognizable. We want consistency, but it's important to understand why something should be consistent and what you're representing. Designers can create false relationships and confuse users by making different things look the same and vice versa. So masked objects can end up in your designs, even with the best intentions. When you define your objects from the beginning, it will help you ensure they are distinctive and recognizable. In my experience, almost all online entertainment delivery services have masked objects. It's a thing. So we're going to go to imdb.com for this masked object and review a few things that we've already covered. So I love TV. I get notoriously frustrated with the UI of most streaming services. I guess this is the downside of being an OUXer. You can't unsee it. So this is the what to watch section on imdb.com. We have several sections to assist users in browsing various content. So this watch guide tab is so far off to a pretty good start, even though there's already a shapeshifter on this page. So I'm going to give you a second. If you guys can look at the content, just let me know if you can point out the shapeshifter, put it in the comments, and we'll circle back to that after. So the next we have is fan favorites. And we already have some masking going on. TVs and movies are being mixed together rather than creating two identifiable separate sections, which would make this content much easier for the user to browse. It would also be easier for the user to find the type of content they want to consume. If this content was separated by TVs and movies, we can then add more helpful filters like now in theaters or new streaming movies. It would also allow us to add a filter for TV shows by network. So this is when things get a little bit weird. Top picks is personalized recommendations, but that's just filtering. So this option could just be applied elsewhere when you're logged in. Let's click that button and browse those popular movies. This is the list view of popular movies, but I'm also wondering how this is different from fan favorites, since the description says the most popular movies are determined by the IMDb users. So I'll give them credit that the content shown here is pretty consistent from the previous list, except I can't watch can't watch a trailer from this page. The visual design is obviously inconsistent, but I think this could be a more effective alternative to the list configuration rather than a totally separate page. Most important, this is kind of unnecessary. We'll circle back to why in a moment. I think this is interesting that the watch list option has you log in here in order to add to your watch list, but they didn't use the same flow for top picks. It should be the same. But both of these options are related to the user directly, just like that UPS example. But unlike the UPS example, the watch list is connected to the user-specific information, apparently multiple times. As you can see, there's some redundancy here, which is creating kind of extra options on the nav. And this kind of disorganization could cause some confusion, users won't really understand what they're picking. You should always understand, or at least have an idea of what you're going to click on before you click on it. Finally, the last option is most popular. I'm not sure how this is different than fan favorites. Finally, notice that list that is now different from the most popular list that we just saw under top picks, because they have masked the TV and the movies together and ultimately making this unnecessarily complicated. And just to kind of cherry on top of this, this is a prompt on the homepage. And guess what? Both of these options guide you to the guide we just saw. The two buttons go to the same place. So this is just a little bit odd. Plus, the thing that they're promoting is to choose your next show or movie, which it doesn't do any of that. That's the thing they're advertising is the one thing they don't do is separate those objects. So there's much more interesting ways to present in dynamic content to users. We know from earlier that awards and celebrities are also objects in the system. So creating recommendations based on that is a much more interesting way to promote content. This can be specific to new movie releases, award shows, specific celebrities, or directors. When designing or aligning objects, it's important to create and visualize consistency in that object, plus represent the clear differences within the object. And that's how you avoid a masked object. The real tip in this example, and every example that we've reviewed today, is understanding the underlying structure of things is the secret sauce. That will allow you to identify and create more thoughtful, elegant solutions and avoid all kinds of unintuitive objects. So Jerome Bruner was not a designer. He was a psychologist that specialized in educational psychology and cognitive learning. The unintuitive objects we just discussed happened because the designers that created the systems did not understand the structure or the relationships that they were working with. This is why it's so important to look at the various objects in existing systems and get a clear understanding of what the objects are, how the objects relate to each other, in addition to understanding the content and the context of the system that you're working on. In an existing system, we must understand, identify, and organize in order to solve the issues more intuitively and comprehensively. This is actually easier than when starting from scratch because the context is already there. My final example is how I've done this before. This is a concept I created at my previous job. And again, don't worry about too much of the details here. Leadership wanted to change the focus of how we interacted with our users within our products. This concept represented how we can change our focus to the individual user instead of the organization they worked for. Currently, when a user moves from one client to another, so one institution to another, the original association ends and a new one begins. This new concept will make a user's account an independent record that can be associated with the institution instead of belonging to it. As you know, education has a high turnover rate, but educators often change schools within a district or move to a nearby district. With this change of strategy, we can build a more comprehensive history of our users instead of losing all of their historical data every time they switch jobs. In addition, the landing page will now provide a personalized experience where users can receive recommendations, information, and content based on their role, occupation, location, and their areas of expertise. Additionally, this project will consolidate and centralize user management between legacy tools. It would be easy and quick to manage user permissions, add, edit, and remove access to all applications for institution's administrator. This would replace the disconnected siloed user management found in each tool of the current system, which was a long-standing issue for many years. So the system already had many elements, and the new requirements would unfortunately add a lot more. So since I couldn't remove any information of the various elements, I started to group them and streamlining the navigation by content and functionality for a more intuitive experience. The navigation was designed to have two paths so the users are never lost. The first is a global navigation, which by definition is always available to the user throughout the platform. And the other navigation is an affordance-based path that is easily created through an OOUX framework. This navigation anticipates the user's needs as they navigate related objects and other calls to action. The portal contains several groups of functionality. Institution management, where the user will manage the institutions they work for or are related to the user. The user can have a variety of associations with institutions. For example, a teacher can have access to just a single school that they work for, or a district administrator could be associated with many institutions. Plus, someone who no longer works for a school, but is a volunteer for Cognia, could also still have access to the learning community to further their professional development in between positions. So the institution management section handles all of those specific options. Just like the last example, application navigation will vary quite a bit depending on the permissions that the user has combined with that institution that they're viewing. The applications list covers a suite of custom tools developed by the company to provide support and services to both institutions and users. User account management is pretty standard across most applications. This is where users manage their settings, notifications, and also an event calendar. All three of these categories we just discussed are part of that global navigation, which we refer to as the wrapper. And again, that's consistent on all pages across the tools. With the portal navigation section, the last section is specific to this landing page, and a user can always return here via that home button on the application navigation. The portal nav includes a library of resources and information to support tools prioritized by user insights. A content marketplace where user can buy professional development lessons, centralized reporting to access reports from all tools at a single location, and finally, user usage in data insights. The rest of the sections list views that are most recent instances of the portal-specific content. Notice the consistency of the layout, but also the intentional variations to avoid any unintuitive objects. My understanding of the requirements and the product goals, coupled with my OOUX skills, means I can understand the system structure and object relationships that enabled me to deliver this concept in less than 48 hours. It wasn't ideal timing, but I was able to represent a high quality concept quickly to leadership. And of course, after that presentation, product and development teams refined and validated this concept cross-functionally. The OOUX certification has significantly improved my design skills, which I've applied in every project I've worked on since becoming a strategist. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much.